Ezinne Okoro stood outside the primary school gates at 29 years old, watching children half her age file past in crisp uniforms. She'd been married at 16, widowed at 26, and for the first time in her life, she'd made a choice that was hers alone. She was going to learn to read. Not for a husband, not for a family, for herself. But as she stepped through those gates, she didn't know that her hunger for validation would consume her, that proving she was worthy would become the only thing that mattered, that she would lose herself trying to be seen. The headmistress looked at her application with barely concealed pity. "You'll be the oldest student we've ever enrolled. Are you certain about this?" Ezinne kept her voice steady, though shame burned in her throat. "I'm certain." The woman sighed, stamping the form. "Classes start Monday, and Miss Okoro, please understand, the other students may not be kind. Children can be cruel to anyone different." Ezinne nodded. She'd survived worse than children's cruelty. Or so she thought. She didn't know that cruelty would become the fuel that drove her, that every insult would feed something dark inside her. Her first day, the children stared, whispered, giggled behind hands. Ezinne sat at a desk meant for a child, her knees pressed against the underside, trying to make herself smaller. The teacher introduced her as a special student who was very brave to be learning. The word brave felt like an insult, like she was a charity case, a circus act. When the teacher asked her to read aloud, the words swam on the page, letters she'd never learned. And when she stumbled, when she failed, the laughter came. Sharp, cutting. The sound that would echo in her mind every night. The sound she would do anything to silence. Weeks passed. Ezinne studied until her eyes burned, traced letters until her fingers cramped. The other students moved past her effortlessly while she fought for every word. And then David Nwachukwu noticed her, the scholarship student from the city, 19 years old, kind eyes. He'd stayed after class one day, watched her struggling with pronunciation, and offered to help. "You're trying really hard," he'd said gently. And something in Ezinne broke open. Someone had seen her effort, not her failure, her effort. She didn't know that moment would become her addiction, that she would need his validation like oxygen. David began tutoring her after school, patient, gentle, breaking words into pieces she could manage, and Ezinne absorbed every moment, not just the lessons, but his attention, his time, his approval. When he smiled at her progress, she felt like she existed, like she mattered. She started staying longer, finding excuses to need more help, bringing him food she'd prepared, small gifts. He accepted graciously, not seeing the desperation beneath her gratitude, not understanding that she was building her entire sense of worth around his validation, that without it, she would crumble. The village began to talk, an older woman, a young man, alone together. The whispers reached Ezinne's ears, but she didn't care. Let them talk. David was the only person who'd ever made her feel intelligent, capable, worthy. The only person who didn't see her as the illiterate fish seller, the child bride, the widow. When she was with him, she was a student, a person with potential, and she would protect that feeling, guard it, fight for it, even if it meant crossing lines she didn't recognize were there. David started to feel it, the weight of her need, how her mood shifted entirely based on his attention, how she appeared everywhere he went, the river where he studied, the path he walked home, always with a reason, always with a smile. But her eyes held something desperate, something that made him uncomfortable in ways he couldn't name. When he suggested they'd take a break from tutoring, her face went blank, empty. "Have I done something wrong?" she asked, voice hollow. And David, kind David, couldn't bear to hurt her. No, I just thought you might want to try studying alone now. You're doing so well." The relief in her eyes terrified him. But Ezinne couldn't study alone. The words meant nothing without David's approval. She'd sit with her books and see nothing but emptiness, feel only the absence of his validation. So she found reasons, created problems, pretended to struggle with lessons she'd mastered, anything to bring him back. And David, trapped by guilt and kindness, returned, not seeing that every time he saved her, he was teaching her that helplessness was rewarded, that her worth only existed when he witnessed it. He was building her cage without knowing it. The school began to notice. Teachers whispered about the inappropriate attachment. Students mocked them openly. David's aunt, the headmistress, called them both to her office, and she spoke firmly. "This has to stop," she said. "People are talking about both of you, your reputation, your future. It's not healthy." David knew she was right. But when he tried to distance himself, Ezinne fell apart, stopped coming to school, stopped eating, sent him messages that frightened him with their desperation. "You're the only good thing in my life. Without you, there's nothing." And David learned the terrible weight of being someone's everything. He went to her home, found her thin, hollow-eyed. The woman who'd been fighting so hard to learn now looked like she was disappearing. "You have to live for yourself," he tried to explain. "Not for me, not for anyone else's approval, for yourself." But Ezinne looked at him like he spoke a foreign language. Living for herself? She'd never done that, didn't know how. Her worth had always been determined by others, her father, her husband, and now David. She'd just replaced one judge with another, and she couldn't exist without a verdict. He stayed. Of course he stayed, made her eat, encouraged her to return to school, and Ezinne came back. But something had shifted. She'd learned that withdrawing brought him running, that her suffering was currency. She began to use it, not consciously, not maliciously, but the pattern was set. When David tried to maintain boundaries, Ezinne would fade, and he would feel responsible, guilty, until he returned. They were locked in a dance neither knew how to stop. Her need and his guilt, feeding each other in an endless spiral. Months passed this way. Ezinne's reading improved, her writing became confident, but her emotional dependence on David only deepened. She began to resent any time he spent with others, any attention he gave to other students. In her mind, he belonged to her. He'd saved her. That created a bond, an obligation. When she saw him talking to a younger female student, helping her with homework the same way he'd helped Ezinne, something cold settled in her chest. He was hers. That girl had no right, and Ezinne would make sure she understood that. The younger girl started having problems. Her books went missing, her assignments were sabotaged. Someone spread rumors about her. She stopped asking David for help, too frightened by the anonymous threats she'd received. David never connected it to Ezinne, never imagined the quiet, struggling student could be capable of such calculated cruelty. But Ezinne felt no guilt, only satisfaction. The girl had learned her place, and David's attention returned where it belonged. Ezinne had protected what was hers, and she would do it again for anyone who tried to take him from her. David's aunt finally intervened. She'd heard the rumors, seen the signs. She called them both to her office, and she spoke firmly. "This relationship is unhealthy for both of you. Ezinne, you've made tremendous progress, but you've become dependent on David in ways that aren't appropriate. And David, your guilt is enabling behavior that's becoming obsessive. This has to end." Ezinne sat perfectly still, perfectly calm, and then she spoke, voice like ice. "I've done nothing wrong. I'm a student, he's a tutor. If people want to make it something else, that's their problem, not mine." David stopped tutoring her, stopped speaking to her except when necessary, and Ezinne felt herself unraveling. The structure of her days built around him collapsed. School lost meaning. Reading lost purpose. Everything she'd worked for was supposed to lead to his pride in her, his validation. Without that, it was all empty. She stopped attending classes, stopped trying. If David wouldn't see her progress, why bother? The education had never been the point. He had been, and without him, she was back to being nothing. She'd learned all the wrong lessons. The village elders came to her home, demanded she leave David alone, called her shameless, a widow preying on a boy. Their words should have wounded her. Instead, she felt nothing. She'd already lost everything that mattered. David had been her last chance to be someone, to matter. They'd taken that. So what did their judgment mean? Nothing. They could call her whatever they wanted. She was already dead inside. The woman who'd walked through those school gates with hope was gone, and what remained didn't care anymore. David's father came from the city, confronted Ezinne directly. "You've done enough damage. My son came here to learn discipline, not to be manipulated by a desperate woman." Ezinne looked at him with empty eyes. "I loved him," she said simply. "I just wanted to matter to someone. Is that so wrong?" The father's expression softened slightly. "Love shouldn't feel like drowning," he said quietly, "for either person." And for the first time, Ezinne understood. She hadn't loved David. She'd needed him. And there was a difference. But understanding came too late. David left for the city that night. His father wouldn't risk keeping him in the village any longer. But before he left, he came to see Ezinne one final time, found her by the river where they'd studied together. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have set better boundaries. I should have seen what was happening. I'm sorry." And Ezinne smiled, a broken, terrible smile. "Don't be sorry. You gave me something. Even if it was temporary, even if it was based on lies I told myself. For a while, I mattered. Thank you for that." After David left, Ezinne continued going to school. But something fundamental had broken. She read the words but didn't feel them, passed her exams but felt no pride, graduated at the top of her class and felt nothing. The education she'd fought for meant nothing without someone to witness it, to validate it. She'd learned to read and write, but she'd never learned to exist without external approval, and that was a lesson no teacher could give. Some prisons are built inside your own mind, and those are the ones you can never escape. Years later, Ezinne would see David's name in a newspaper. He'd become a teacher, was helping underprivileged students in the city, doing good work. She felt nothing. No pride, no resentment, just emptiness. She'd destroyed herself trying to matter to him, and he moved on, lived his life, never looked back. The story people told was inspiring. The widow who overcame illiteracy, who fought for education, who succeeded against all odds. But they didn't know the truth. She hadn't overcome anything. She just traded one cage for another, and this one had no doors at all.